This is Robert at Merit Web Project, and this is the QuikTest Education number 7 video. Today we're going to look at anxiety treatment protocols. We looked at state versus trait anxiety issues last time. This time we're going to focus more on the treatment of anxiety. And of course, anything that I say in here, any suggestions that I give or the protocols themselves for treatment, it's entirely up to you whether or not you use those. You do not need to use those. You can use whatever you want as far as treatment. And, what we present here is just stuff from the industry that has been used over time reliably for the treatment of anxiety. We looked last time at state versus trait anxiety. State anxiety is basically anxiety in response to a real threat or a perceived danger. And once that threat or danger is gone, in a person who does not have trait anxiety, the state anxiety usually goes away. Now, the symptoms, the indicators of anxiety, both state and trait, are relatively the same in the heightened arousal state. So you can't really tell if it's state anxiety or trait anxiety if you're backed into a corner with a barking rabid dog chasing you into that corner. You don't know whether it's trait or state anxiety. All you know is the person's got anxiety. Usually you don't need long-term treatment for state anxiety unless the perceived danger or fear continues to present itself. Trait anxiety is something totally different. And number one, some of the anxiety symptoms can occur without any indication of a danger, threat, or some kind of fear that can just be there. Some more than not, but any of the traits might come up if there's no threat or immediate danger. There are also other factors that may be involved. Pacing, nervous body movements, hands, biting of the lips, shaking feet, and so on. Excessive, unreasonable worry without any real way to pin down what a person's worrying about. Inability to sit still, especially when we're talking about something important. The person's got to get up and pace. They got to stand. They got to sway back and forth. They can't sit still. Vague or even real somatic complaints, cramps in the arms and legs, especially major muscles, chest pains, and so on, headaches, all that kind of stuff can be an indication of trait anxiety. And the fear of grave illness also can arise out of that whole thing. They tend to astrologize, prognosticate future catastrophes. I know something really bad is going to happen in a couple of weeks. I can just feel it. Not sure what it is, but something bad is going to happen in a couple of weeks. That's prognosticating the future. And these people tend to be good at that. Most trait anxiety has its roots in child development somewhere where there was a consistent threat or fear, danger posted in front of them, causing an instilled repressed fearfulness as a core personality trait. Maybe an abusive parent, and so the person had state anxiety when the parent would abuse them, but then they had this nebulous fear that caused anxiety even when the parent wasn't abusing them, because they knew reliably that abuse would come back again. And then as time goes on, it becomes more and more disconnected from the actual danger events, and the person just develops this generalized anxiety issue where they're constantly fearful of what's coming over their shoulder. You will want to use home of origins and personality style assessment if you believe that a person has trait anxiety. Medications for treatment of trait anxiety, usually a doctor will prescribe stuff like antidepressants, which is kind of interesting to me because those drugs usually only affect serotonin, and serotonin hasn't really been proven to be a cause of anxiety, but doctors are using antidepressants. You can see the list of those antidepressants here that are commonly used in the treatment of anxiety. I can't speak for the how well it works, but we can say that if a medical doctor has prescribed these things, the best thing you can do is record those drugs and carefully research those drugs for side effects. You may not tell a client to discontinue those drugs. You may not discourage a client from taking those drugs. You're practicing medicine without a license at that point. You will be sued and possibly face criminal charges if something bad happens to this person. We don't want to mess with scripts, but we do want to be informed. Make sure you record all drugs that a person is taking so that you've got access to that list if need be. Benzodiazepines, they're known as anxiolytics, things that take away anxiety. These should only be prescribed by a medical doctor for a short period of time. Anything over a short period of time, a couple weeks, a month, and the person is risking addiction. Sometimes that addiction can be very strong. Sometimes it can be very, very hard to break. Cutting off a benzodiazepine suddenly may cause seizures and may cause death. We do not want to discourage people, but we do want to watch out for signs of physical addiction, physiological addiction, or of abuse. People abuse benzodiazepines on a very regular basis, and the most abused benzodiazepine is alprazolam, also known as Xanax. Extremely short-lived drug in the bloodstream, extremely rapid onset when a person takes it. Librium is not used much anymore. Klonopin, it lasts 12 hours. When a person takes it, they don't get that instantaneous high they get from Xanax. It's a slower elevator here, and that's why it's not a preferred drug of abuse. Just doesn't give you the thrill, but people will use it because it is a benzodiazepine. Because of the 12-hour window here, this thing will last 12 hours in your bloodstream. It just doesn't go away. Taking it every 9 hours, a person's going to build up that amount of Klonopin in their system, amount of benzodiazepine, that's potentially deadly, a slow motion suicide. Valium is another good replacement high, not quite as sharp of an increase, but it is about a 6-hour drug. Ativan, people say, is not really as abusive, but all of these drugs are benzodiazepines. They are all potentially addicting. Xanax, Klonopin, Valium are probably very, very high on the street drug list. Beta blockers are going to lower your blood pressure. So if a person's already got low blood pressure, very good likelihood the doctor will not script this. If they've got high blood pressure and they come in complaining about anxiety, a doctor will use one of these to act as a double-edged sword. Exposure therapy. I'll go through these last items here very quickly. Exposure therapy for some Anxiety issues can be very, very helpful. And those issues are related to specific phobias or, as you see here, social anxiety. Say, as we say here, a person gets a promotion at work, well, now they're going to have to be dealing with some public speaking. They have social anxiety, they're in big trouble. They either got to quit their job, or they have to suffer through this or stumble through this and maybe lose their job. One of the best ways to deal with this is exposure therapy, where you're exposing them to the thing that causes the anxiety, to deal with it on a case-by-case basis as you provoke the anxiety. Cognitive behavioral therapy and psychodynamics are also encouraged as tools to use. We'll look at those in a minute. With exposure therapy, we want to do systematic desensitization. There you go. They need to learn relaxing skills that work for them. Now, there are some canned relaxation skills that psychologists and therapists try to tell them to use. Some of those work, some of them don't work. They need to find the ones that do work and have them in their repertoire. Things like breathing exercises, closing their eyes, active imagination, taking themselves mentally out of the situation, seeing themselves conquering the situation, and so on and so on. These are some of the techniques that can be used. And as they begin to develop skills, they can go and say, you know, I did this before and I won. And they can count their victories one by one as they do this. You create a step-by-step list with the client and say, okay, now you get this fear of public speaking. We need to get you to the place where you can do public speaking because your job demands of you now. We're going to start in the office and we're going to work our way through 10 fear events. And they're going to become worse and worse and worse fear events all the way up to standing in front of 50 people talking. Face your ultimate fear. So you kind of slowly get into these fears and they conquer these things one at a time. And they work through these steps. Psychodynamic therapy is investigation of what happened in the home that might be causing these issues. Identification of defenses that developed in a psychic structure to avoid unpleasant consequences of conflict. Psychopathology develops during significant negative childhood experiences and consistent developmental conflicts. Internal representations of experiences and relationships are organized around specific interpersonal relations created in childhood. In other words, there's this kind of match. You're afraid of your boss because you're afraid of your dad. Those internal representations sometimes translate into adult life experiences in archetypal ways. That's what I was basically just saying. Thus, an individual in life that matches the internal representation of the childhood father figure will cause reaction associated with representation created in childhood. Cognitive behavioral therapy, this works for depression, this works for anxiety. Let's look at it. Negative automatic thinking, you can probably invent 100 of these, but these are some things that you need to do. You need to identify the client's negative thoughts, challenge and confront the negative thoughts. I'm no good. Okay, I am absolutely no good. Okay, well, let's talk about you not being good. Explain what you mean by that. Challenge it. Okay, well, what about this thing that you told me that you do? That's a good thing, right? Now you want to blow up the negative thoughts so that they don't work anymore. Then you want to replace the negative thoughts with more realistic thoughts. Here are some just simple examples of automatic thinking. Always, never thinking. I always do this. This always happens to me. Focusing on the negative. Every time I try, I fail. Fortune telling. Well, if I try, I'm going to fail. Mind reading. You know, that guy over there was looking at me funny. I bet you he hates my guts. Thinking with feelings. That's always a bad thing to do. Guilt beating. They beat themselves up over things they believe they should do or not do. Labeling, calling themselves names, basically. Personalizing events and charged with negativity without cause. There's a big fight between a couple of other people. Well, if I wasn't here, it wouldn't have happened. And then blaming. Blaming is always a good tool to use when you want to perpetuate trouble. So these are some of the things you can do treating trait anxiety. This document is always available to you. Use it, print it, study it, and employ it with your clients who have anxiety issues.